You get dressed every single morning without thinking about it. A shirt, pants, maybe a jacket if it's cold. It feels like the most natural thing in the world, something humans have simply always done. But the real answer is far stranger. Clothes aren't just about staying warm. They aren't even mainly about that. The actual reason humans started covering their bodies has almost nothing to do with what you'd guess. It has to do with lice. Yes, lice. Here's how scientists even figured this out. Because there's no clothing left over from 100,000 years ago to dig up and examine. Fabric rots. It disappears. So researchers had to get creative, and one of the strangest, most brilliant solutions came from studying a parasite. Most people spend their whole lives trying to avoid thinking about. Human lice come in different types. Head lice live in your hair. Body lice live in clothing, feeding on skin but retreating into fabric to lay their eggs. Here's the key detail. Body lice cannot survive without clothing. They evolved specifically to live in it, which means the moment body lice evolved as a distinct species, separate from head lice, is roughly the moment clothing must have existed for them to live in. A geneticist named Mark Stoneking led research comparing the DNA of human head lice and body lice to figure out when they split into two separate lineages. His findings pointed to somewhere around 170,000 years ago. That's the estimated birth date of clothing. Not a guess from cave paintings, not a guess from tools, from lice DNA. Doesn't that completely change how you picture this? The first fashion decision in human history is written into the genome of a parasite. Now, why did clothing appear right around that time? This is where it connects to something much bigger happening to your ancestors' bodies. Roughly 2 million years earlier, early humans had already lost most of their body hair, likely as an adaptation for regulating heat while running and hunting across hot African landscapes. Less fur meant better sweating, and better sweating meant an animal that could chase prey for hours in blazing heat without overheating. A useful trade in Africa. But around 170,000 years ago, something else was happening. Homo sapiens were beginning to move out of the warm regions they evolved in toward colder climates, harsher winters, higher altitudes. And a hairless body that thrived under an equatorial sun is a serious liability once you're standing in snow. So, clothing wasn't a fashion statement, it was a patch. A way of solving artificially and quickly a problem evolution hadn't had time to solve biologically. Your ancestors couldn't regrow thick fur fast enough to survive the cold, so they took fur from something else instead. Think about what that actually required. Not just draping an animal skin over your shoulders like a cape. Real clothing, the kind that keeps you alive through an ice age winter, needs to be fitted. Sewn. Shaped to trap warm air against skin, and that means tools. Archaeologists have found bone needles at sites dating back roughly 40 to 60,000 years, some with tiny eyes clearly designed for threading sinew or plant fiber. That's a strange kind of technology to picture next to spears and fire. Precision sewing equipment, carved from bone, used by people you'd probably picture holding clubs. Here's a question worth sitting with. Which invention do you think mattered more to human survival in an ice age? The spear or the needle? It's a closer call than it seems. A spear gets you food for a day. A needle gets you a survivable body temperature for an entire winter, every winter, for the rest of your life. Some researchers, including archaeologist Ian Gilligan, have argued that clothing may have been just as critical to human expansion into cold climates as fire itself. Without it, populations pushing into Ice Age Europe and Asia likely wouldn't have lasted more than a few brutal winters. There's another layer here too, one that goes beyond staying warm. Once clothing existed, it almost immediately stopped being purely functional. Coverings became decorated, dyed, marked with patterns. Anthropologists studying more recent hunter-gatherer and early settled societies have consistently found that what people wore quickly became tangled up with identity, status, and group belonging. Which clan you were from, whether you were an adult or a child, who you were allowed to marry. So the moment clothing solved the survival problem, it immediately started solving a second problem nobody asked it to solve: telling other humans who you were, at a glance, without a single word spoken. Notice that's still exactly what clothing does for you today. A uniform, a suit, a hoodie. None of these exist because you'll freeze without them in most climates you actually live in. They exist because they say something before you open your mouth. This is the part that should genuinely reframe how you look at your own closet. You're not just covering your body out of habit or modesty, you're participating in a system that's been doing double duty for roughly 170,000 years. Keep the body alive. Announce who the body belongs to, and the lice are still with us, by the way. Body lice never went extinct. They're still out there, quietly living in fabric. A tiny genetic fossil recording the exact moment your ancestors made one of the most consequential decisions in human history. Not to build a house, not to light a fire, just to take the skin off something else and wear it as their own. So tonight, when you pull a jacket off a hook without a second thought, you're repeating a decision that once meant the difference between an entire population surviving a winter or disappearing from the historical record. Getting dressed was never really about looking good. It's about a species figuring out how to become something the sun and the fur never designed it to be.